Picture a major Western capital just after dawn. The trains are running. The cafes are open. The glass towers still catch the same pale light they caught 5 years ago. Nothing in the street tells you that the balance of the place is changing. The visible city remains intact. The invisible city is already in motion. A townhouse is sold through a holding structure, quietly, without a sign ever going up. A family office moves liquidity from one banking jurisdiction to another. A founder keeps the company operating in the same market, but transfers personal residency, trust arrangements, and future inheritance planning elsewhere. The children are enrolled in schools that are not in the country where the fortune was built. The wife acquires residency first. The husband follows later. The press calls it lifestyle. The accountants call it sequence. That is the first thing to understand. When serious money leaves, it rarely leaves in a theatrical way. There is no siren, no public declaration, no line of armored trucks. It exits in legal documents, tax elections, revised domicile statuses, new custody structures, and one-way family decisions made months before the public realizes the climate has changed. And the people doing this are not necessarily predicting collapse. That is the popular fantasy. What they are actually doing is much colder than prediction. They are measuring concentration risk. They know that a passport can become a limitation. A tax code can become an extraction device. A banking system can become a permission system. A stable country can remain visually stable long after it becomes structurally hostile to capital, privacy, mobility, or control. In this video, we are going to examine why the largest peacetime wealth migration in modern history is happening, what these people are responding to beneath the headlines, and why the real lesson has almost nothing to do with being rich. There is a comforting myth that wealthy people move because they are emotional, disloyal, or greedy. It is a useful myth for governments because it turns a structural signal into a moral accusation. It tells the public that departure is a character flaw, not a diagnostic event. But in the forensic record, elite migration usually follows a different pattern. First comes a subtle change in tone. Political language hardens. Wealth becomes a public target. Fair share rhetoric shifts into open hostility toward capital, inheritance, non-domiciled status, offshore structures, private schools, foreign ownership, or internationally mobile income. Then come the advisory memos. Lawyers begin flagging future exposure. Tax planners start modeling scenarios that were once considered remote. Bankers ask quiet questions about residency. Trustees review governing law. What looks like politics on television looks like contingency planning inside private offices. The ultra-wealthy do not need certainty to act. They only need asymmetry. If the downside of staying in one jurisdiction is confiscatory taxation, retroactive rule changes, capital restrictions, reputational targeting, or reduced exit options, then waiting for absolute clarity is irrational. By the time the danger is obvious to the general public, the cheapest and cleanest exits are usually gone. This is why the rich often appear to leave early. In reality, they are not early. They are simply responding to incentives before the crowd converts them into headlines. And there is an even deeper point here. The people at the top do not organize their lives around patriotism in the way the middle class is taught to. They may love a country. They may invest in it. They may still operate there, but they do not confuse emotional belonging with total legal dependence. They treat jurisdictions the way a disciplined operator treats counterparties: useful, conditional, revisible. That sounds cold until you study what happens during stress. When rules tighten, governments do not spread pain evenly. They reach first for what is visible, taxable, immobile, and politically defenseless. The salaried professional with one passport, one home, one bank network, one pension system, and one domestic tax identity is easier to trap than the billionaire with layered entities and 3 residency options. So the real divide is not rich versus poor. It is flexible versus concentrated. And once you see that distinction, the migration data stops looking like vanity. It starts looking like reconnaissance. To understand what this looks like in practice, You have to stop thinking in slogans and look at the forensic record. Take the United Kingdom. For years, Britain sold a specific proposition to international wealth: rule of law, deep capital markets, respected courts, elite education, global language advantage, and a tax framework that, while never simple, still made the country usable for internationally mobile families. London became not just a city, but a vault with culture wrapped around it. Money did not come only for yield. It came for predictability. Then the atmosphere changed. The political mood turned against visible privilege. Tax policy became less a neutral framework and more a battlefield. Non-domiciled status, inheritance exposure, school fees, property taxation, business exits, carried interest, and the optics of foreign wealth all moved closer to public attack. For a middle-class voter, these may look like isolated policy debates. For a family with 8 or 9 figures, they are not isolated at all. They are connected signals. They indicate that future treatment may become more punitive, more unstable, and more openly ideological. So what happens? The billionaire does not usually liquidate everything and vanish overnight. That would be crude, expensive, and unnecessary. Instead, the family restructures. Residency shifts first. Children are moved. Holding companies are reviewed. Trust jurisdiction is reconsidered. A second home stops being a convenience and becomes an operating base. The business may remain exposed to Britain, but the family no longer remains fully captive to Britain. Now take China. This is a different mechanism, but the same pattern of response. In China, the issue has not simply been tax. It has been the relationship between private wealth and state power. When the state becomes more willing to discipline industries, pressure entrepreneurs, restrict capital movement, intensify data control, and subordinate commercial logic to political priorities, wealth reads that as a change in property rights reality. Not theoretical property rights, lived property rights. A wealthy founder can still be rich on paper inside such a system. But the question becomes brutally practical. Rich in what form, under whose permission, and with what exit capacity? That changes behavior fast. Families begin looking outward through education pathways, foreign residency options, overseas property, offshore structures, and legal distance. Often, the first exported asset is not cash. It is the child, then the spouse, then the legal architecture. Money follows once channels are secure. And then there is Russia, where the lesson is harsher. In Russia, wealthy people learned that fortunes built under one political settlement can become vulnerable under another almost overnight. Sanctions, seizures, banking restrictions, travel barriers, frozen accounts, immobilized assets, counterparty risk, and sudden international illegibility all exposed a truth that many people prefer not to think about. Ownership is never purely financial. It is geopolitical. A man may control mines, real estate, or industrial stakes worth hundreds of millions. But if he cannot move, settle, transfer, insure, litigate, or access those holdings across borders, then his net worth is no longer a reliable measure of real power. It is partly trapped mass. That is the pattern across all 3 cases. Different countries, different ideologies, different legal systems. But the same forensic conclusion. When the relationship between wealth and the state becomes less predictable, serious capital seeks optionality before compulsion becomes visible. And this is where the street-level reality begins to matter. Because by the time elite wealth is leaving through lawyers, trustees, and residency planners, ordinary people are still reading articles about whether anything is really that bad. They are still anchored by routine. The bins are collected. The supermarket is open. Mortgage payments still clear. The city still looks normal. That visual normality is what traps people. The rich are not reacting to the appearance of disorder. They are reacting to the loss of future room to maneuver. Once you understand that pattern, the next piece becomes easier to see. The ultra-wealthy do not view countries the way most people do. They do not see a nation only as homeland, flag, sentiment, or inherited identity. They see it in part as a service platform. That phrase will offend some people, but the record supports it. A jurisdiction provides a bundle of services: legal protection, tax treatment, banking access, property enforcement, commercial predictability, educational infrastructure, physical security, travel freedom, and succession clarity. When that bundle deteriorates, sophisticated families do not argue with reality. They rebalance exposure. This is exactly how they think about portfolios. No serious allocator would place all liquid wealth into one bank, one counterparty, one currency, and one maturity profile. Then call that prudence. Yet that is how most people structure their lives. One passport, one tax residence, one home market, one pension regime, one domestic bank network, one legal system expected to behave reasonably forever. That is not stability. It is concentration disguised as normality. The wealthy solve this by unbundling functions. One country may be for residence, another for banking, another for business incorporation, another for trust law, another for education, another for a fallback passport or long-term residency right. They are not looking for a perfect nation. They are building a layered map of usable jurisdictions so that one government's policy error does not become a total system failure. Notice what is happening here. They are diversifying not just assets but dependents. That is the real concept most people miss. Jurisdictional diversification is not mainly about escaping tax, despite the lazy public caricature. At a deeper level, it is about reducing single point of failure risk across your legal and financial life. A person who earns in one place, stores liquidity in another, holds some assets internationally, and has a lawful right to relocate has a wider survival corridor than someone whose entire existence is welded to one state's decisions. And that matters because governments change character faster than citizens change assumptions. A stable country can remain pleasant while becoming extractive. It can remain rich while becoming hostile to mobility. It can remain lawful while becoming less forgiving, less private, and more invasive. By the time the average person feels that shift directly, the wealthy have usually already converted geography into insurance. This is the part where most viewers assume the subject stops applying to them. It does not. In fact, the middle class is usually the group that most needs a second door because it has the least room for policy error. A billionaire can absorb friction. He can hire counsel in 3 countries, move banking relationships quietly, restructure ownership, and tolerate inefficiency while the paperwork catches up. An ordinary investor, a small business owner, or a salaried professional cannot. If a government raises taxes sharply, restricts transfers, changes residency rules, expands reporting burdens, weakens currency purchasing power, or makes entrepreneurship less viable, the middle class feels it first in daily life, not in headlines, in cash flow, in school fees that suddenly bite harder, in rent or mortgage pressure, in business margins that stop compensating for legal complexity, in savings that still exist nominally, but buy less optionality, in the realization that every major life function is tied to one administrative perimeter. That is why the practical lesson here is not become globally mobile like a billionaire. It is simpler than that. Reduce concentration. For some people, that begins with a legal residency option outside their home country, a digital nomad visa, an ancestry pathway, a retirement program, an investor route, or a work-based permit. For others, it begins with a foreign bank account in a reputable jurisdiction, held lawfully and fully declared, not as a secret but as redundancy. For others, it may mean a modest property abroad in a place where living costs, residency rules, and personal safety create a credible fallback. Not a fantasy villa, a usable base. The sequence matters. First, identify what you are trying to protect: income mobility, savings access, family relocation capacity, tax flexibility, business continuity, or educational options for children. Then map which jurisdiction performs each function better than your current one. Then test whether the pathway is legal, affordable, administratively realistic, and compatible with your existing obligations. This is where many people fail. They romanticize escape instead of engineering fallback. The point is not to flee dramatically. The point is to make sure that if one country becomes more punitive, less affordable, more restrictive, or less livable, your entire life does not have to negotiate from a trapped position. The wealthy understand this instinctively. Most ordinary people understand it only after a shock, and that delay is expensive, because exit systems are generous when they are ignored and selective when they are crowded. So here is the clean conclusion. Jurisdictional diversification is not a luxury product for oligarchs, founders, or globe-trotting tax exiles. It is a recognition that wealth, freedom, and personal security do not fail all at once. They fail function by function. First, flexibility narrows. Then access becomes conditional. Then costs rise. Then movement becomes more bureaucratic, more expensive, more visible, and more politically charged. That is why the time to build a second door is before you need to use it. The workflow is not mystical. Establish a lawful secondary residency path. Build at least one external banking relationship in a reputable jurisdiction. Hold a portion of liquid assets where one domestic policy error cannot reach everything at once. Study one realistic relocation base. Review how your business, tax residence, inheritance exposure, and family logistics would operate under stress. Then update that map every year, because jurisdictions change, and what looked safe 5 years ago may now be crowded, hostile, expensive, or fragile. There are caveats. Internationalizing badly can create tax mistakes, compliance failures, banking trouble, and false confidence. A second jurisdiction does not make you sovereign. It only widens your margin for error. And for some people, the right answer is not leaving at all. It is simply reducing total dependence on one state's competence. But the forensic record is clear. The rich are not teaching you to panic. They are teaching you not to remain concentrated, because when the exit doors are still open, building options feels unnecessary. When they begin to narrow, everyone suddenly calls it urgent. By then, you are either a person with a map or a person in a queue.